What if the fate of an innocent man was decided by a leader who knew the truth, but chose pressure over justice? What if the loudest voices in the room weren't the ones speaking truth, but the ones demanding control? And what if the one who held ultimate authority stood silent while human power tried to judge him? Morning came, but it didn't bring peace. The night of chaos, betrayal, and false accusation had led to this moment. Jesus had already been condemned by the religious leaders, but they didn't have the authority to carry out a death sentence. For that, they needed Rome. So they bound him. The one who had healed the sick, calmed storms, and walked in freedom now stood tied like a criminal. They led him to Pilate, the Roman governor. Pilate was not part of their religious system. He didn't care about their traditions or their internal disputes. His concern was order, control, stability. Any threat to Roman authority had to be dealt with quickly, and that's how they framed it, not as a religious disagreement, but as a political threat. They presented Jesus as someone dangerous, someone claiming to be a king, someone who could disrupt Roman power. Pilate looked at him and asked the question directly, "Are you the king of the Jews?" It was simple, clear, focused. And Jesus answered, "You have said so." Not a full explanation, not a defense, just a statement that held both truth and mystery. The chief priests began to accuse him of many things. Their voices grew louder, more aggressive, more desperate, because they needed Pilate to see him as a threat, to feel the urgency, to act. Pilate listened, watched, observed, and something didn't sit right. He could see it. This wasn't about justice. This was about envy, power, control. He turned to Jesus again. "Aren't you going to answer? See how many things they are accusing you of." This was another opportunity, another moment to speak, to defend, to clarify. But Jesus remained silent, and Pilate was amazed. Because silence in the face of accusation is rare, especially when your life is on the line. Most people fight, argue, beg, defend themselves with everything they have. But Jesus didn't. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he didn't need to prove anything. There was a custom during the festival, a tradition. Pilate could release one prisoner chosen by the crowd. It was a way to maintain peace, to give the people a sense of control. Among the prisoners was a man named Barabbas. He wasn't misunderstood, he wasn't falsely accused, he was guilty, a rebel, involved in an uprising, a man who had committed murder. The contrast couldn't be clearer. One innocent, one guilty, one peaceful, one violent. Pilate saw an opportunity. He knew the leaders had handed Jesus over out of envy. So he asked the crowd, "Do you want me to release to you the King of the Jews?" It seemed like a logical choice, an easy decision. Why choose a criminal when you could release someone who had done no wrong? But the chief priests stirred up the crowd, influenced them, shifted the narrative, and the crowd responded, "Release Barabbas." Pilate must have felt the tension rising. This wasn't going the way he expected. "What shall I do then with the one you call the King of the Jews?" he asked. The answer came back louder this time. "Crucify him! Crucify!" A brutal word, a final word, a word that meant suffering, humiliation, and death. "Why?" Pilate asked. "What crime has he committed?" It was a reasonable question, a necessary question. But it didn't matter, because the crowd wasn't looking for reason. They were responding to influence, to pressure, to emotion, and they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him!" The volume increased, the tension built. The situation became unstable, and Pilate faced a decision. Not about truth, but about risk, about what would happen if he went against the crowd, if unrest broke out, if control was lost. So he made a choice, not because it was right, but because it was easier. Wanting to satisfy the crowd, he released Barabbas to them, and he had Jesus flogged, beaten, scourged, and handed him over to be crucified. That moment revealed something deeply human. Pilate knew the truth, he saw it, he recognized it, but he didn't act on it. Because sometimes knowing what is right is not the same as doing what is right. And that gap, that space between awareness and action, is where compromise lives. Pilate wasn't cruel in the way the crowd was. He wasn't driven by hatred, but he was driven by fear. Fear of losing control, fear of conflict, fear of consequences. And fear often leads to compromise, to choosing safety over truth, comfort over conviction, silence over courage. This story is not just about Jesus standing before Pilate. It's about what happens when truth stands before us, and we have to decide what to do with it. Pilate asked questions, he examined the situation, he even tried to find a way out. But in the end, he chose the path of least resistance, and that path led to injustice. Barabbas was released, the guilty set free. Jesus was condemned, the innocent punished. It doesn't make sense, not logically, not morally, not legally, but it reveals something deeper. Because this moment is more than a political failure, it's a reflection of something spiritual. The innocent taking the place of the guilty, the righteous standing where the sinner should stand. Barabbas walked free, not because he earned it, not because he deserved it, but because someone else took his place. And that someone was Jesus. That's the heart of the message. Not just injustice, but substitution. Not just a broken system, but a greater purpose. Because what looked like a failure of justice was actually the beginning of redemption. Jesus didn't lose control in that moment. He surrendered to it, willingly, knowingly, because he understood something deeper than anyone else in that room. That this path, this suffering, this decision would lead to something greater, something eternal. Pilate saw a problem to solve. The crowd saw a demand to fulfill. The leaders saw a threat to eliminate. But Jesus saw a mission to complete. And that changes everything. Because it means this moment was not random, not accidental, not meaningless. It was part of a plan, a purpose that went beyond human understanding. And that purpose still speaks today. Because we all face moments like Pilate. Moments where we know what is right, but feel pressure to choose something else. Moments where truth is clear, but acting on it feels risky. Moments where the crowd is loud, and conviction feels quiet. And in those moments, we have a choice. Do we stand or do we compromise? Do we follow truth or do we follow pressure? Pilate chose the crowd. He chose safety. He chose the easier path. But it wasn't the right one. And that's the warning. Because compromise rarely feels wrong in the moment. It feels necessary, reasonable, even justified. But over time, it reveals itself and the cost becomes clear. But there's also hope in this story. Because even in human failure, God's purpose still moves forward. Even in injustice, there is redemption. Even when people choose wrongly, God is still at work. Jesus stood before Pilate, silent, calm, unshaken. Because he knew this was not the end. This was the path. And because he walked that path, everything changed. Thank you for watching this video. If this message spoke to your heart, don't forget to like, follow the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today.